Hello, everybody. I'm David, the host. Ugh, why can't I do this? I feel like a retard.
I'm glad
I
it's
haven't,
not just me.
I haven't got that wrong in ages.
So
Okay, let's try that again. 3. At least I'll have a genuine smile. 3, 2, 1.
The Creatives with AI podcast, the spiritual home of creatives curious about AI and its role in their future.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Creatives with AI podcast. I'm your host, David. And on today's show, we have Tim Neeves. Now, Tim founded Prospect Arts in 2002 as a vehicle to produce creative content with a focus on communicating stories of justice, hope, and care for the environment. He has 17 years experience of making narrative-driven films. He's traveled over 2 million miles across Africa, Asia, and Central, South, and North America, and Europe. He's had the privilege of working on films with leading brands such as ITV, the US Olympics, NBC, National Geographic, and he's led development on organizations such as Compassion, Food for the Hungry, Save the Children, and World Vision. We don't have enough time for me to go through his entire CV. So I think we'll let him introduce himself and add to that a little bit as we move forward. So, Tim, welcome to the podcast.
thank you for having me. It's been a while since we caught up over coffee.
It is. Yeah, it has been.
Talked about coming on your show.
It has been.
I think it's interesting, like even hearing you read through some of that little background, it makes me think I need to update my LinkedIn profile. It's a little it's now 22 years as opposed to 17. So
wow. Okay.
5 years progressed.
Yeah.
But no, it's good to see you.
No, and same. And thanks for coming on. We met because you were working on a film project and you were looking for some funding and talking about grants and filling in grant applications and stuff. And I'd had some experience recently with that through some of the public sector work that I had. But what struck me was some of the projects that you work on I found were really, really interesting. And because you've got such a long history working in film and film production and that sort of thing, I was really curious to get your thoughts on, what you think about how the technology is moving forward and how AI how AI is going to fit into that in a larger sense, and how it fits maybe into workflow and where you think it might go and how it might improve the business, but maybe what the risks are as well. So that was kind of why I wanted to have you on. And I know we had a really interesting conversation to start off with, so we can just continue that basically.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I'm like probably a lot of people blown away by the kind of the swift development of AI. And it's easy to get into that sort of fearful place of thinking, oh no, this is gonna, we're going to lose our jobs. I don't honestly believe that's the case, because I just think, the human creativity I think transcends computer. I think obviously there's a lot of great stuff with AI that certainly is already making our lives easier. And actually, I think it can help unlock greater creativity for the human brain in terms of kind of creating more time to be able to put into being creative rather than just the function of, of getting to that place of, putting together your piece of work. But yeah, it's been quite amazing. I think probably back in 2019, this is kind of a good possibly starting point just to kind of in terms of how it's really impacting our work.
Yeah, sure.
We were doing a documentary which went to Netflix called Brave Blue World, which is kind of looking at kind of the water crisis globally and innovation that brings hope, for us as we look to the future. And I think at that time, to be honest, I wasn't massively aware of AI, and I think we were hearing it more in the context of the water industry that we were filming, and how they're using kind of AI and nanotechnology to help streamline processes and early warning systems and improving flow and all that kind of stuff. But I think probably in the film, certainly from our side of the film industry, the AI stuff was probably very much more rudimentary. Like things weren't really built into the platforms that we were using. I mean, the kind of work that we do is not that kind of super high-end VFX studio shoots. It's more kind of on the ground, documentary, talking to people, gathering story in that capacity. So I think from where we were probably back in before the pandemic, it was researching a documentary was, a laborious effort of, going on Google, searching for stuff, reading through, kind of collating notes, moving things around. And that that's speaking for me personally, has probably been the biggest transformation in certainly my process. And in terms of accelerating the creativity. So I'm not the quickest writer in the world. I can write well, but it takes me time to get there. And so to write down a proposal for a project, prior to the tools that we all use, everybody uses it, it does speed up the workflow. It doesn't, I would never use things like ChatGPT and Bard and others to do the creative, because I've not found it works that well for me. But what I have found, it really, if you feed it with information and then can kind of work through it yourself, it just means that I'm having more time to put to the creative thinking and shaping of things, and less time literally structuring out and like silly little things like cutting down a paragraph from 400 words to 100 words, all that kind of stuff is like literally is a dream. So when I think about like Brave Blue World in pre-production, we were probably 2 to 3 months to research, and actually we kept on going through the process of production, kind of researching stories and writing and developing ideas. I'm currently working on a really, really fast turnaround project, which is another water documentary project. But the timeline is absolutely insane. And if it weren't for these tools, literally it would be impossible to actually work to do this project. So I think, and this is where I think the challenge comes, is obviously when technology moves on, expectations shift as well.
Yeah.
So like I remember when I first started out 20 odd years ago, you turn up on a shoot with, a camera with a fixed lens and a mic on it, and maybe like a boom mic and a tripod. Nowadays, when we turn up on a shoot, you've got like 2 or 3 camera bodies, probably about 6 or 7 lenses, radio mics, boom mic, gimbal, drone, you name it, everyone wants it all. It's because it's I guess the democratization of technology. It all becomes cheaper, which is great, but just then the expectations shift. So I think that's probably like an initial little thought about from my end in that kind of like producer director role. I think in terms of research and kind of writing, and to very, very quickly be able to get your head into things like, particularly when doing something around technology that you might not, I'm no expert. I can't be an expert on everything I make a film about. So in terms of very quickly being able to get up to speed, with things, it's amazing. I think it's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think what's happened is I don't know if you know the hype curve, but basically you start off and you get this new technology, and then you just get, there's this like fever pitch of excitement about it. And then shortly after that, you have what's called the trough of disillusionment. And it basically falls off a cliff where everybody, it's all fun to play with in the beginning, But then it's like everybody has to say to themselves, or everybody says to themselves, okay, we've got to get real now. Like, how do we actually use this? And what I've noticed over the past kind of 12 months is that we've now gone through, I think, the peak of the hype cycle, and it's now coming down the other side. And what I'm noticing is businesses, and it's just what you were talking about, is a lot of businesses are now finding how they fit it into their actual process. Do you know what I mean? It's not the whizzy stuff. You're not doing the creative stuff with it. You're not, or maybe you are. Maybe you're using some of the tools. And I know we can talk about the tools that you use to do production and stuff. And I know there's been some hugely technological tools to help with that. And I know things like, a lot of the, like, I don't know, the Adobe tools and everything are putting AI into everything. So you've got, Adobe Premiere Pro, and you've got Audition, and you've got all the different tools, and you've got, Resolve, and you've got all that stuff who are now building AI elements into everything that they do. But that's almost a side effect of the real use of it. I mean, I was talking to a guy named Steve a couple of weeks ago, and he has a company that does audio ads. And he said, they don't use AI voice technology to read the ads. They use AI voice technology to read 14,000 addresses for each store, because no one wants to do that. So they have a real person do the voiceover for the ad, and then when it comes time to read the address, they just clone the voice, and then they can have it read all the different addresses without a human having to do that.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I mean, interestingly, we did a project we work for a number of different non-profit organizations, and before Christmas we were doing a very short little piece on Haiti. I don't know whether you know what's going on there, but it's just become incredibly lawless. It's one of the most dangerous places currently on the planet, and this organization, I think, were kind of having to close down some of their operation because there's a lot of gang kind of kidnappings and all that. But they'd produced this little film from there, but they'd used AI voices on it, and it just felt really weird. I have to say, it just did not work. But I could see, as you know, from that other example you gave, I could see how that would work when you're trying to, mass produce, a whole load of different things. One of the things that I was talking with a friend about, so I'm not quite sure how much kind of to go in on this, but like this new startup that I'm working on, which you helpfully gave a bit of advice on, in terms of the government grant. But we were talking about how to open up content to a global audience better, and this could be relevant for a lot of the non-profits that we work for, but equally from an entertainment perspective, if you're producing or even e-learning videos or whatever, is how you could create content and very, very quickly and inexpensively be able to put that out into multiple languages without just what we've done historically, which is subtitling or overdubbing with having to go and source VOs from different regional accents and all that. But when you look at I'm trying to remember the name of it now, what's that company out in the States that where you can upload a clip and then it can translate you, and
11 Labs.
But it's that kind of thing, where how that could be brought into the production world, where it's only a matter of time before the likes of Premiere Pro and Resolve have a tool like that, where it can you can be speaking on camera, and then all of a sudden your voice comes out with the same tone, but in in French, Arabic.
Yeah, they I think 11 Labs is doing real-time translation now.
Right.
I think I just saw that, but they just got $80 million worth of funding as well to really grow the company. And I have noticed that I used to subscribe in the beginning, but I was a subscriber because I wanted to really play around with it. What I found is that I don't actually use it that much, so I stopped paying for the subscription, but I do keep up with the news on what's going on. And I think the the other company that you're thinking about maybe is called HeyGen, which is
HeyGen,
HeyGen, yeah. And that's the one where they can, in a video, not only will they translate it, but they'll redo the mouth shape so it matches the shape of the word that you're saying, which is insane.
Yeah. I mean, you can imagine that, would be an incredibly helpful tool particularly for e-learning, because you think, you take a university like, in Oxford, who are probably putting out content. I mean, I know there are a number, like Berkeley College out in the States do a lot of online courses that they want to get out to the world. But if you're a student out in India whose, English is not your first language, to be able to have that immediately being able to go out, all of a sudden you'll be able to reach a much, much bigger market, which I think was, and from a documentary point of view, I mean, I think about Brave Blue World that went to Netflix, was translated into, I don't know how many languages, but most of that subtitled. How much more immersive and engaging would that content be to an audience if they can hear it in their own language, where it's not, I mean, I don't know whether you've watched many, I hate watching shows when they're overdubbed, when you've got, like, I remember watching Money Heist, which is that great, I thought it was a great Netflix show back in the pandemic. It's in Spanish, and I was watching it in with subtitles, and then I saw that you could watch it in English, so I switched over and I was like, this just does not work. But if it were the actor's voice and tone and lip sync, I don't know, would that feel weird? Probably not. I don't know whether you'd notice.
I don't know.
Maybe.
I don't know. And it's a good question. And it's something I was talking about the other day. And I can't remember if it was on a podcast or not. So I apologize if I've talked about this already to anyone listening. But we were watching, what is that, Married at First Sight show? But it was Sweden. And
right.
It could be anything, though. There's been there was a French crime drama called Spiral. And, there was The Bridge, which is which was a Nordic noir type show. And my wife and I both agree that we love to watch it in its natural language with the captions, because even though it's in a language that you don't know, you still get meaning from the intonation and the way that people say the words. And you can get the emotion, even if you don't know what they're saying. If somebody's yelling at you, or in a bad way, or if someone's yelling at you in a good way, kind of thing. And so, yeah, totally. I mean, she switched it over to English, to the dubbing in English for a while, because I was just sitting in the living room and she thought I might want to just hear it. And I was like, actually, no, just put it back. That's wrong. But I don't know if AI would be, I don't know how good it would get. I mean, at some point in the next 5 or 10 years, you probably won't be able to tell the difference. And you can put out anything in any language and it will get the intonation pretty correctly. But for now, I think it is still quite awkward.
Yeah.
And you do mostly documentary type stuff, don't you? Did I get that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and that is where, when there's obviously a lot of fear around the exponential growth of AI, and there are other things that one could talk about with that. But from a production point of view, it doesn't worry me, in a sense that you can't replace human connection. And I think that's the thing. Sure, you could use virtual studios, LED walls, and create all of that kind of environment for TV commercials and feature films and stuff like that. But when you're talking about, doing real life storytelling around stuff like climate change or human interest stories, which people want, seeing the world through other people's eyes, that you can't replace that with AI, thankfully. I'm sure someone will try.
Yeah.
But exactly.
But
and I think from go on.
No, go ahead.
I don't know where I was going.
Sorry. Sorry, I thought you were done. No, it's interesting, and I think particularly in the documentary space, like you said, I can see where it's really helpful for doing all the behind the scenes stuff, writing up everything. But is it even helpful with doing things? I guess you need to learn about a particular, like a person or what they're involved in or what their business is or whatever. And it's really good at doing the summarization for that. And like you said, sort of cutting down paragraphs, which I think is totally ironic that, they put you in school and they say you need to write a 6-page paper on this particular topic. When in the real world, if you gave somebody a 6-page paper, they'd be like, can you summarize this in 6 paragraphs, please? And it's like, It's totally backwards. But anyway, AI is brilliant at doing exactly that kind of thing. And I wonder if have you used it for things like trying to understand maybe what questions you want to ask people, or is that something that's just instinctive to you and you know what to ask and you know how to do the interviews to get the right information out?
Yeah, I've personally not used it for that. I'm sure obviously you could do. For me, it's an instinctive process. I mean, I guess as part of the research phase, if it's something I really don't know much about and I need to know certain things, then I think I would probably use it in that instance. But generally speaking, I think an interview is a bit like this. It's a conversation, and you see where that conversation goes. And even from a creative perspective, like interestingly on this project that we're currently working on, the producer writer and I were working on some, like, very, very quickly, some treatment ideas, and the client then ended up plugging it through ChatGPT to kind of see what else could be done with it, and it came back, and it was so very for me. It was so very obviously written by ChatGPT, and I think that's something that I've become acutely aware of when you look through LinkedIn. I'll put my hand up and say I'm terrible at social media. It's just not something I particularly enjoy. Doesn't give life to me. But when I do, have a little hunt around, on LinkedIn or very, very occasionally on Facebook, it's just amazing how obvious the AI posts are. It really is. And I don't know whether people realize that, but I think it is a little bit. I think that's where things can become a bit disappointing, is where creativity ends up being sucked out and probably being replaced by laziness, because these tools are brilliant and they're really great, but I think there's no excuse for dropping the ball on creativity because of these tools are there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I was on a call the other day and somebody mentioned the fact, they said, I can always tell when it's AI because it puts a comma before and in the in a list of items. And I was like, no, but that's called the Oxford comma. I was like, but it's interesting though, for someone from the UK where you don't really use the Oxford comma, as opposed to the US where that's what we're taught in school. That's a key giveaway to someone here, but it wouldn't be a clue to someone in the US, for example. So, and obviously the spelling, it's almost always US spelling. Even if you tell it that you're in the UK and you wanted to use UK spelling, it still uses American spelling for some reason. It just can't figure it out. But aside from, those are the little clues that you can find, aside from the fact that it's, written in a quite formal, it's always quite formal, I think, and it's business speak most of the time. And I think that's because the core training of them were on academic papers, because those were the first, I think that's the first bit of content that the researchers had access to. So they just trained it on academic stuff. And so it ends up sounding very academic, or at least most of it does to me.
And then if you ask it to do something a little bit more poetic or a little bit more creative, then it just goes way the other end. And it's like, just does not sound real.
Yeah. Have you tried Claude.ai?
No, I should check that out.
Try Claude. Claude's really interesting because in my experience, it seemed, I don't know what's going on with my video either. Do you see it flashing?
You're flashing.
I have no idea why it does that. Anyway, it's slightly annoying. It's not doing it on my camera. Sorry, we're totally off track now, but it's for anybody, if you actually saw this, it's like my video is just flashing like mad, but it's not doing it on my camera. So I have no idea why it's doing that. Anyway, yeah, Claude.ai, I find if you're trying to write anything that's like more emotional or something that's a bit more personal, Claude is really, really good at that. And I have no idea what they've done in the background to make it work that way. So top tip, if you're trying to do something like that, maybe try Claude and see what it's like, and see if maybe it does something a little bit better. But the few times I've asked it to do things like that, the results have been amazing.
Wow. Oh, I'll check it out. But yeah, I think with some of the tools that, yeah, from a post-production point of view, obviously massive time saver for us and also cost saver. I think, back again pre-pandemic, we'd come back from a shoot and we'd have to send off interviews to be transcribed with, Rev or whoever else, spending money, time, doing all of that. And we've switched over to Resolve, which was mainly because I think a lot of people finish films in Resolve, and since they've improved the editing stuff in there, it feels a better tool for us. But to be able to straight out in the timeline create transcripts that are locked to the time code. So then when you're doing a dialogue cut, you can literally just highlight a bit of text, hit the little down arrow, it drops it to the timeline. So for very, very quickly, and a simple tool that, you don't even need to be like a seasoned editor to be able to use. So that is a huge time saver to break the back on a story, in the post-production. But also there's so many other things. Obviously you dropped in like Audition, and we've often used Isotope over the years, and there are so many great audio plugins out there that can remove, I literally have no idea how it works, it's all crazy, removing background sounds. And actually even the built-in one on Resolve I think is quite incredible. We've done a lot over the last couple of years since we're out of the pandemic. We're still doing, for some of our international non-profits, edit projects that are based around the Zoom interviews and stuff that's been shot locally that's sent over to us. And I think that's been a really positive move from the pandemic, is that it's forced some of these non-profits to think a bit more creatively about how to create content and not always fly crews out spending all that money, when actually there are some things that could be done really well locally. But sometimes, the quality of the content can be amazing. Other times it can be quite extraordinary. But they're like some of those AI tools in Resolve for like cutting out audio, like removing reverb and things like that is amazing. A huge time saver.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of discussion these days about democratizing AI and making sure that everybody can use it. But I think part of what AI is doing is it's democratizing a lot of industries. For example, video. I mean, you had YouTube, but I think even over the past, up until let's say the pandemic, but even a little bit after that, I mean, I'm thinking in the last 12 months, we've taken a massive step forward in what we're able to do. Because even 18 months ago, I mean, you could get a transcript done automatically, but it was still kind of wonky and it was a bit expensive and the tools weren't great. Now anybody, basically that's free and everything. If you've just got a piece of software, like I use, it's Premiere Pro generates it. You can do editing straight in the text. Like you can do you know what I mean? You can do the same thing in Adobe Audition now. And it's literally democratized that whole thing. And you combine that with mobile phones that can record in 4K that give you, if you've got an iPhone with, a separate app, or even the app the camera app that comes in the phone. I mean, the quality of the film that you can get out of that, I mean, 10 years ago, that would be a $30,000 camera.
Yeah.
And now you've just got it in your hand in a phone. And if you, then you've got a free editing tool that you can go in that has, some settings and some things, or maybe, you spend £30 on getting a, some sort of a plugin or something for it. And the next thing somebody sitting at home who plays around with it for, a few hours can make something that's, I won't say it's as good, because it won't be as good as a professional can do, but it'll be damn close.
Oh, it really is. And that, I think is really exciting. And I think particularly when I think about our work in the kind of non-profit and also sustainability work, is the fact that those tools have become more readily available means that, it reduces the amount of work that we potentially could do. But from a world perspective, if I don't need to travel to, Rwanda to go and shoot a story because there's someone there who's able to go and shoot that, and we can kind of collaborate on the storytelling, then why not? I actually do remember working, a friend of mine, we were working on a project ages ago, and it was like a last minute project. It was the first time that he'd ever done it, and he directed a shoot from the UK with an iPad. So the DP who went out, like, literally set up an iPad next to the camera, and then my friend over here was talking to the camera, was having a conversation like we're doing right now.
Yeah.
But they had the camera set up, like really, really nice camera setup over there. But it meant that he didn't have to fly all the way over to Seattle or wherever it was, for the expense, but also the carbon footprint. So I think there's something really good to be said about all of that.
The podcast that's coming out tomorrow, I was talking to a guy who has been an audio engineer for 20 years. He used to work for the BBC and everything. And one of the things that he was saying in the show, which I kind of in the back of my mind knew that it happened, but I never really thought about it. But he said, how many records do you think are recorded with the musicians in the same room? And he's like, they don't have to do that anymore. He's like, we've done shows where you've had the person singing in LA and the person, playing the piano would be in the UK, for example, and they're live at the same time, but they're pulling this together, but they don't even have to be in the same room anymore. And I was like, that just totally blew my mind, because I was like, the technology behind that and because I would think something like that, you need the interaction between the musician and the singer, and there's a lot of feel to it and all that. And, you've got to have, if there's any delay in that, then that can throw all that off, and it could make it really awkward. But he said, no, he said it happens all the time, and it's that kind of thing that's I never really thought about someone directing remotely either, but I guess you can do anything remotely these days. So you just got to crack on with it.
Yeah, that whole music production thing is brilliant. I remember, I don't know, probably 10 or so years ago, I think Logic Pro were trying to do something like that, and it was so jangly and it just literally didn't work. And I even remember during the pandemic trying to do some kind of like live music just for fun, on Zoom. It's like, this just does not work. It's just the latency just becomes a horrible mess.
Yeah.
But I think that the remote directing thing, I think is pretty cool.
That's amazing. So on that, actually, it makes me wonder. I mean, you've been doing this for 22 years, something like that. How have you seen the progression just of technology in general? Do you know what I mean? And then thinking about how far it's come over the past 20, 22, 25 years, to then thinking, where do you think, what's the next evolution of this? Where do you think we're going to go next?
Yeah, I mean, I think possibly where I started out and that those early years, it's one of the most exciting times, I think, in tech development. Like, I remember getting my first Red camera, when they came out, the Red one, and that thing was just incredible. And I think it was the price point that was almost most amazing, because there were like super high-end cameras that were around that time, but they were used on major Hollywood blockbusting movies that to get a camera body would have been like 150 grand or whatever. And all of a sudden Red came out with this body that, I mean, it was not the most stable thing, but which was fine for us because we were doing documentary things with understanding clients, and it was cool. But it was like something, I think it was like $17,000 or $18,000 for the body. I mean, you had to buy other bits and bobs for it, but it's like, this thing shoots 4K. What? That's amazing. And slow motion in 4K was so cool. But I think what happened since then is obviously then with the DSLRs, like the 5D Mark II, when that came out, was a huge game changer for the industry, and being able to use photographic lenses so you can get that nice cinematic depth of field. And I think what's interesting here, we've been kind of slightly pushing back on that. You can see a lot of content out there that's so shallow that you don't really get to see the context of the setting. So I think people are now kind of moving a little bit away from the super shallow stuff, but the tech has just got smaller and smaller. And I think you picked up earlier about like the iPhone. I did a Channel 4 shoot I don't know, a year or so ago, where there was a few shots that went in the TV show that were shot on my iPhone. And literally you could not tell because they just look great. They look really, really good.
It's crazy, isn't it?
And so I think that's probably where things are going to go in terms of just the base level. I mean, the lighting for us is a huge thing. So, up until a few years ago, to get like daylight quality lights would need, huge lighting fixtures with, the appropriate power supplies to go with it. Whereas now, you can travel with an LED that's light, it doesn't get really hot, and you can plug it into a conventional power socket and get really good quality controllable light, where you can change the color temperature. So all of that stuff is just making, and even like the flat LED panels, I remember when they came out, it was like, what, this is amazing. You mean I don't have to take that whopping great bag on this shoot? I can literally just roll this thing up, stick it in my carry-on. And I think that's, we're able to more than often take our principal kit as carry-on when we travel, for fear of, stuff getting broken and lost, which, let's face it, that has happened quite a few times for us. Tripods don't make it. And, so I think it's the kit getting smaller. Lenses, I think, is probably, I'm not sure I have the vision for how lenses can improve, because you look at a lens that's 50 years old, and if it's been well looked after, just looks special. And I think that was the bit of advice I was given when I started out by a brilliant photographer from the States he always said, invest in good lenses, because the camera tech is always going to change. And he wasn't even shooting digital at the time. I think he was just on film, but he's like, invest in a good lens, it will serve you for life. And I've seen that, with the lenses that we've got, they're as good today as they were, 20 years, or 10, 15 years ago or so. And the camera bodies, you can have like a tiny little camera body, but that's the difference, I think, with the iPhone is, how they handle light and all that kind of stuff doesn't match up to like a really beautiful lens. But you could have a really cheapo camera body with a $50,000 lens, and it's going to look incredible. Whereas if you have a £100 lens on a £50,000 body, it's not going to look great.
100%. And that's when I started off in photography. Much like you, I started off and was sort of an amateur semi-pro photographer for a while, and I got taught the same lesson very quickly. And it's like, you've got to get the light without geeking out too much. I'm really resisting the urge to just deep dive into all of that. But yeah, the lens makes such a difference, which is, I have a small tiny little, I've got a Sony ZV-E10 or whatever it is, right, that I just do now that I have for my home studio. And it's perfect, but I just bought a prime lens for it, which is really, really nice. And, it gives nice shallow depth of field, but it's not too shallow. And, the quality that it gives is incredible compared to something even 5 years ago. And it's, like you said, the tech is just going and going and going. And I wonder, I'm sure somebody's going to shove AI. They're going to call it AI, but it's just going to be some sort of electronics that go in a lens that maybe they can, try and correct some of the, color, do some color correction or some sort of something in the lens, or, it's going to get better at following focus, or I don't know, something. I'm sure somebody will figure out a way to call it AI and put it in a lens.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably going to be more down to the camera bodies, and I think it'll be down to like how to use AI for image stabilization, and it could even be things like auto-focusing and aperture, so be able to read the light balance in a space and make intelligent decisions on, which is actually, to be honest, that would be brilliant, because that's always been a bugbear of mine. If not that we very often use like auto exposure, but like auto exposure never really works. And so I think that would be an advancement, where it's intelligently, like, my background here, knowing that it's judging the aperture based on what you are obviously filming, as opposed to like a general exposure of the whole image. So I think that kind of stuff could get smarter. I'm not sure what else they could do, really.
Yeah.
I guess I think there could be cataloging and naming of clips. That would be a brilliant thing. And that's obviously something that is, from a post point of view, is just going to get better and better of, as you're ingesting content, all the metadata surrounding it. So that could be potentially built into the camera tech, so it's able to, as you're going, be, keywording stuff and starring images that maybe were performed better by the cameraman. I mean, you can imagine the DP say, stop coming up with these ideas.
I love it though. Do you know what? I hadn't thought about that. And that feels like feels like a startup in there somewhere, but,
okay.
Yeah, if no one's doing it already, but yeah. But again, what's interesting though, for me is that you've already gone back to what's an actual business application for this that can take the tedious tasks, right? We're not talking about the creative part of it. What we're talking about is the tedious bullshit that you have to do that takes hours and hours. Like, if anybody out there has ever shot, hundreds or thousands of photos, and then you try and categorize and tag all that stuff. And I know Google and some of the other platforms are now trying to get a little bit better about that. But you're absolutely right. That's an insanely useful use for an AI tool, because it can interpret and it can come up with tags that you might not even think about. You know what I mean? And it can create a whole bunch of stuff. It could talk about feel. It could talk about all sorts of things that you may not think to tag. And then adding all that stuff to the metadata of the images, which then creates its own problem, because now it's just exploding the size of the image because you've got all the metadata and all the other stuff. But
I guess
go ahead.
That is business. That is a business. And I think that is, it's probably more likely to be built into the post-production workflow. But I think it could be great though, from a set, like if you imagine you've got like a producer with an iPad that's wirelessly connected to a camera that's automatically, feeding information, like got sentiment analysis in there, figuring out like, oh, that, the talent sounded a little bit moody in that shot. This one here, let's give that one 3 stars. That kind of stuff would be great, but I think it's more likely to happen in a post-production workflow. And that, in many ways, that is something around this new business that I'm in the process. So I finally submitted for this Innovate UK right. grant a couple of weeks ago. That was a big process. But is around this whole idea of how to kind of curate and ingest and catalog content. So yeah, lots there.
That's interesting. I know that there are. So I've worked with a lot of big data companies, and particularly around public sector and transport. And one of the ways they've been using similar tools now, this was before AI became popular and everything was just machine learning. But they've been using machine learning to try and understand from autonomous vehicles when there's, say, a near miss, and then trying to analyze those near misses. So you've got 15 terabytes of data from one vehicle for one day. So you've got vast amounts of data that you're trying to churn through, and you can't watch all that footage. So you have to process it somehow. So what you do is you feed it into a machine learning tool, which then goes through and it identifies instances where it thinks something might be a near miss. And then they had people manually looking at those. And then if they said, yes, that qualifies as a near miss, the people had to manually tag all of the things that they could think about that particular image, so that they could then go back and start to do some analysis to see if there was anything in common. So for example, does the vision on the vehicle struggle at dawn or dusk? Because the lighting's quite awkward. It's okay if it's totally dark and at night, and it's okay if it's totally light during the day. And there goes my video again. But it doesn't really work in those kind of mixed conditions. Or, is it one of those roads that's got a lot of canopy over the top, and how when the sunlight comes through, it's like just kind of strobing in your eyes almost. And but they had to have people do that. They couldn't have, the tool couldn't figure it out. And so it's interesting that you say that, because that could be maybe an application you hadn't thought of. But that's another instance where you really need to be able to analyze that stuff. And if you're churning through, if you think you've got tens of thousands of vehicles on the road or hundreds of thousands of Teslas, they must have some tools that they're using AI to churn through some of that stuff to find that.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that, a lot of this stuff has been developed. And I think, I had an amazing conversation with a guy over the weekend who's actually local to us, who works in AI and machine learning. I was telling him a little bit about some of the stuff I'm wanting to do. And a few years ago, the cost to develop this kind of tech, so like for that company you're talking about, it would be a colossal amount of money. But those models, a lot of those models have been built that can be adapted and tested and trained on other things. I mean, it's a world I don't hugely understand, but I think there's a lot is possible in terms of like gaffer taping this with that, and what could we learn from the likes of a Tesla, who've got models that are analyzing driver profiles and various different things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So I have a question for you. When you use like a ChatGPT or something like that, do you feel the need to be polite to it?
Oh, do you know what? I'm quite British, and so I am. I like, would you mind, please, awfully?
Terribly.
Terribly, yeah. Do it again. That was rubbish.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, actually, I did have a bit of a go at ChatGPT when I think I might have told you this actually when we had coffee. So as part of this government grant, I was trying to work out some quite complicated financial modelling, and so I was trying to get chat, because I did statistics at A level, but that was quite a long time ago. And so some of those things, and I did do my MBA, but we didn't go hugely into the details of compound churn rates and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, so I thought, do you know what? I bet ChatGPT could help me figure this out, because I knew what I needed to do, but like it was just the time to try and figure out the actual equation. I couldn't find anything suitable on Google. So I was like, went on to ChatGPT, and I fed it some of my numbers and said, okay, so how would this work out? And I was looking at it, and the actual results didn't they didn't add up.
Yeah.
And so, so I got it to do it a couple of times, and every time it came out slightly differently. And then eventually I went and found, a proper scientific calculator and did the sum myself.
Yeah.
And then I had to go and tell ChatGPT off and say, surely the answer is this. And it kind of came back saying, oh, my apologies, I must have got that wrong. But it did make me think, my goodness, I wonder how many financial institutions are missing a few, decimal points somewhere, and how many trillions of dollars are being misrepresented around the world.
I think what people are finding is that you can't ask it. If you ask it what 2 plus, I think now like basic arithmetic it knows, but in the beginning you could say what's 2 plus 2 and it'd be like 7, because it's not doing the math, it's doing the language, right? And it's looking at linguistic patterns, not mathematical patterns. And this gets into something that I think is going to happen, which is, I think what you're going to find is if you, in the future, you're going to interact with, I don't know, some AI assistant, and you can say to your AI assistant, you could give it that information, say, hey, I'm trying to accomplish this. Here are the numbers. How would you recommend that I approach it? And your assistant is not going to know, but your assistant is going to be connected to a mathematics AI that would know. And so what it'll do is, on your behalf, it will go out, it will reach out to that maths AI. It will have it do that and come back to you with an answer that it gets from there. So it's not going to know. It's just going to know someone who does know. And it'll be the same if you want to play chess, or if you want to play Go, or you want to, whatever. Then you say, hey, I'd like to play chess. And you go, okay, great. It'll say, okay, great, I'll play chess with you. And then instantly it just connects to a chess AI and it just passes through the information. And I think that's where we're going to end up. And it's not, all it's going to be good at is the conversational part. But if you ask it details about anything specific, like engineering or, I don't know, chemistry or physics or maths or anything like that, it will go out to another narrow AI tool that can answer those questions and do the interaction.
Well, that sounds good. I don't know whether you've used Agent GPT. I don't know whether that.
No.
Yeah, so I don't know whether that's something a little bit like that, maybe, where it kind of goes off and uses different tools. So where ChatGPT is obviously, I think there are different plugins you can get now for ChatGPT. I've not really experimented much with that.
Yeah, there are. I think you were limited, or at least you used to be. I do actually pay for it, but it's another one of those tools that I used a lot in the beginning, but I don't actually use it a lot now. I do use it 2 or 3 times a week, but I don't kind of use it like I used to. Like, going back to something we talked about earlier, I used to use it when I very first started doing the podcast. I used to use it to try and help me come up with what I thought were interesting questions to ask people, and unusual questions to ask people, so I could, like you said, do a bit of research on their industry and what they did and on them, and then say, give me some interesting questions. But what I found is that it, even though it gave me interesting questions, that didn't help in a conversation. And it ended up breaking up the conversation. Do you know what I mean? And it was like, then it just turned into more of like a, I don't know, a news story, or it felt more like a journalistic interview. And that's not what I want to do. I just want to talk to people. So I don't even use it for that anymore. I do use AI tools to do all the summaries of all the episodes, though, and to do things like suggest titles and, give me a summary. It goes out. I have tools that go out and create all the timestamps and all the, the chapters and all that stuff afterwards.
Do you use it for cutting as well, maybe? I mean, we've not tried that ourselves, but I know a number of editors who use like Premiere to do suggested cuts. Like, so, here's an hour's interview, cut it down for me into 20 minutes or whatever.
I don't have one that does that. I do have a plugin for Prem that if you have a multi-camera setup, it will actually cut and do all your multicam stuff for you. And what you do is you basically just highlight all of it, and then you can play through it. And at any point, you can decide. I mean, it does like speaker priority basically is what it does in the beginning. But then if you have like a wide camera shot as well, it will incorporate those in occasionally too. So it gives you this, just if you don't do anything, it will literally give you, a nice cut, almost with some kind of L&J type joins to it as well, to kind of give it a little bit more drama, and it's not just jump cuts the whole time. And it's really good at that. But if you want to then go in and play it back, you can then just literally just click on a button and decide which camera you want to use. But you can you can use it from a Riverside thing where I might have 2 cameras and you might have 2 cameras. And do you know what I mean? We could have 4 different shots and it would actually go back and redo that. So that's the tool I have, but I've not tried anything to actually edit content and edit it down. I would think that'd be interesting, but also
a bit risky.
It's risky because and you'll know this for sure. And this is just something that I've learned, but hopefully hopefully I'm right. But I think it's hard to edit something that you've done, maybe because you have your own, like I have my own ideas about what I think is interesting in a podcast episode and the things that I found interesting. But if I gave that to you of some conversation that I had with somebody else, and I gave it to you and said, look, can your editor edit this down into, half an hour? They would probably pull out different things than I would pull out. And there's that whole creative piece of, who's right? Well, no one's right. It's just different approaches to it. And I would find that challenging with an AI, I think, because I'd be like, well, why is it choosing this?
But I guess that's where this is one of the things that I am finding quite interesting. I'd love to understand more about, or how it could be implemented, is how to use AI to guide editorial based on how it's going to perform with the end user. So, I've often had this argument with editors, where, they'll come to me like, oh, this is what, I thought I put together here, and it be different from how I see it. And there's always that kind of power dynamic, but also I've got to be okay sometimes to let things go, in a sense that I'm not always going to be right. I know that. And, I've got to be open to the fact that someone else's idea might actually be the right thing. In the same way with AI, that actually what an AI engine might come up with could actually be on the money. But I guess that's how things could be tested. So kind of A and B testing on YouTube with multiple cuts of a story, figure out how people interact, where's the engagement levels, and then to adapt the edit based on that information. I think could be quite interesting.
As far as I know, and I'm not a monetized creator on YouTube yet, so I don't know if maybe there's some tools I don't know about. But from what I know, there's no way on YouTube to A/B test things. So if you put 2 versions of the same bit of content up, they're going to strike you because it's the same content and they don't like that. Yeah. But it would be, I do wonder if once you reach a certain, sort of partnership level with them, if they do have a tool where you can put in the same video but with different titles and descriptions and maybe thumbnails, and then A/B test those to see which one performs better. And if I'm sure people have asked for it, even if they don't have it. So this isn't my original idea, but you're absolutely right. And I often wonder, and I don't remember if we talked about this when we talked before, but it makes me think of when they were using AI to see if they could find women who had breast cancer. And I promise there is a link here. And when they started, they thought that it was really inaccurate because it kept giving all these false positives. And they're like, well, it's identifying this, but there's nothing there. And it wasn't until 4 years later that they realized that it was so far ahead that these women did actually have breast cancer, but it was identifying it so far in advance that they didn't even think that was possible. So they had to go back. The doctors had to go back and rethink the whole thing. And then they started to doubt all their results because they're like, well, maybe this thing is actually way smarter, but more accurate than we gave it credit for. And your example, exactly talked to someone about before, because a lot of times I would go into ChatGPT and I would say, hey, brainstorm, give me 5 titles that would convert really highly for this YouTube video. And it gives me back titles and I look at them and I go, but I wouldn't use that. But then there's this little bit in the back of my mind going, but maybe that's me not understanding what's convertible, like what's going to convert.
Yeah.
And maybe I should try it, even though it doesn't feel right to me. What's my goal? Is my goal to get people to click on the video and to watch it? Or is my goal to have it say something that I think it should say?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And that is interesting. And I don't think we'll find the answer out until AI tells us, probably.
Exactly.
But that story of the cancer kind of reminds me of another kind of a similar example of, I think it's an Israeli company who were able to predict a cholera outbreak somewhere in Central America that had like got rid of cholera for I don't know, several decades, and it was tracking like weather patterns, and it was tracking human traffic around the world. And it basically they said, in 2 years' time there's going to be a cholera outbreak. I can't remember the country off the top of my head right now. And then everyone's like, oh, that'll never happen. We got rid of cholera 20 years ago. And then a year later there's going to be this cholera outbreak within a year, and then within 6 months. And sure enough, there was. But what was amazing is that because of that predictive information, they were able to have boots on the ground with the kit available, medicines available to make sure that it wasn't going to be that big a problem. But it was just amazing to think how, using weather patterns, analyzing human movement, they could predict that. It's just amazing.
So that's a fantastic example. I'd never heard that. So I will research that and I'll find a link to it and I'll put it in the show notes. So everybody, if you want to go and read it, you can find it. But that kind of stuff just scares the crap out of me, because if they can predict that sort of thing, what can intelligence agencies, for example, predict? And what can bad actors predict? Makes you think, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it?
This can all get quite scary if we let it. Tim, I'm conscious we're over an hour now already. Thank you very much for your time. We could, like I said this to Adam the other day, I mean, we could go full Joe Rogan and probably chat for 3 hours, but I'm not sure that'd be great for either one of us. But thank you very much for your time today. Do you want to give a shout out to any of the projects that you're working on? Can people go see some of your work? Like, is Brave Blue World still on Netflix, or is there somewhere they can see it, or anything you want people to watch?
So Brave Blue World is still on Netflix. One of the projects I would still love to shout out, we're hopefully going to kind of do a little bit more work on it this coming year, because the story has developed. But again, so just heading into the pandemic, we finished a doc called The Final Fix, which looks at the kind of the opioid crisis, predominantly obviously in the US, but as a revolutionary treatment that was developed 50 years ago by a Scottish doctor that claims it could bring you off any drug of addiction within a matter of maybe a week or two. And it's been held back by the powers that be over many, many years. But as a result of the screenings that we did just before the pandemic on the Capitol in the US, managed to get it in front of some fairly influential people. So they are waiting the data from a quadruple blind FDA trial. It's the first time in 50 years they've managed to get it on that path, because every time the rug gets pulled. So hopefully within this next couple of months, that treatment will be approved by the FDA, unless there's some other nefarious thing that goes on. But anyway, I think that project is hugely exciting, because our film, so we had Ewan McGregor narrating it, which I thought was brilliant. You got the Scottish, but also the well-known heroin addict, not in real life, obviously.
Yeah.
And we feature some guys out in a rehab facility in Kentucky who, in front of our eyes, came clean, having tried for many, many years using, Suboxone, using abstinence, using, methadone and various different things, and had failed. And I thought it sounded too good to be true, but within 15 minutes of these guys plugging on this neuro-electrical therapy, which I'm sure, in fact, almost certain uses some kind of AI stuff in there, but it targets the neuro pathways, and it's like gentle tapping stimulation, a bit like a TENS machine.
Right.
So the brain can produce serotonin and endorphins to provide natural pain relief that's been subdued by addiction. So anyway, it's within 15 minutes, these guys are, you can, even without asking them how they are, they're like, oh man,
you can see it.
It's amazing. So that's really exciting.
So is that out already, or is that still waiting to come out?
There is a version behind a paywall on Amazon Prime, but it is something that I would like to re-pick up, because I think the story has developed quite a lot. But I think I would just encourage your listeners just to keep their eyes out for what we're working on, because we've got some pretty exciting stuff that I can't really go into at the moment, in terms of both documentary projects, but also this new startup, Change Creators, which is going to be very exciting.
Awesome. Well, anybody that's curious, I mean, obviously we'll stay in touch. We're both local and in the media group together, so I'm sure we'll see each other around. But as soon as anything comes out, or there's anything, that you want me to mention, I'm happy to do that. We'll put it on the LinkedIn page and on our social media accounts and stuff like that for you. So we'll be more than happy to do that when it comes out.
Awesome.
And like I said, I'll put links to all this in the show notes. So if anybody's curious and wants links to all this stuff, so I've got, I'll put a link to some Brave Blue World stuff, Final Fix, all that sort of stuff. So yeah. And if anybody wants to find you and needs a documentary produced, I assume you're the man.
Yes. Well, thank you. It's really good to chat with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Well, have a good afternoon, and I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah. Take care.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
That's it. Bye-bye.
Creatives with AI is a proud member of the AI Podcast Network. To stay up to date with current episodes and show information, subscribe to their newsletter at podcastnetwork.ai. And don't forget to follow the show on your favorite podcast platform, so you'll always get the episodes as soon as they're available. Thanks again for listening, and stay curious.